Chevre, how are you? I hope everyone is gesund, stark, und freilich, begashmim seberuchnis. I hope everyone is healthy, strong, and happy physically and spiritually. Today is Erev Shabbos Kodesh Parshas Vayigash. Today is Friday. Also, we could say the Isser Chag of Chanukah. We had Chanukah 8 days. Thursday was Zois Chanukah, the last day of Chanukah. Today is Friday, the day after Chanukah immediately, and we're coming to Shabbos, so there must be a connection between Parshas Vayigash and Chanukah. What are the lessons? Sunday is also Hey Tevis, the celebration in Lubavitch. There was a court case about Svarim, and this was the day that the court ruled in favor of the Hasidim and the Rebbe, that the library belongs to the Hasidim. So what is the connection between all these things? But first, since the war started, we give tzedakah. Hashem should help that the war should end now. The Dan Notzach, and all the hostages should be safe, and Mashiach now. We'll start with a prayer, a pasuk in Tilim, which this pasuk is going to be directly related to what we're going to be talking about today. And that's in Kapitel Kufhei, pasuk Ches. Zachar li'elam brisei, davar tziva li'elev der. Which means he remembers his covenant forever. The word that he has commanded to 1,000 generations. We say this pasuk by every bris, by every circumcision, and this is what many of the commentators say. Zachar le'elam brisei, he remembers his covenant forever. The word that he has commanded, davar tziva li'elev der, is the commandment of bris, that we should circumcise ourselves, and this is a tremendous, tremendous mitzvah. Now's not the time to get into it at length, how important it is for every single Jew, and how it's a sign of the covenant, of the special connection between Hashem and Yidden. Which this brings us to this week's Parsha, and we're going to talk about today something which I think has to be spoken about again and again and again, and it's not spoken about enough, and that is the sanctity of the family unit. In Yiddishkeit, how it's the most sacred thing, how it's the most important thing, and how in a certain sense, this is the secret of our survival. This week's Parsha, after there's that very tense encounter, Vayigash of Yehuda, Yehuda is ready to go on total self-sacrifice to speak to Yosef. So then finally Yosef reveals himself, and he says, Ani Yosef, one of the most famous psukim in the Torah, where the pasuk says, Vayomer Yosef al Echav, Yosef told his brothers, Ani Yosef, I am Yosef, Ha'oid Ovi Choy, is our father still alive? And the pasuk says, Lo yochlo Echav la'ani soisei, they couldn't answer, they were shocked, Ki nivalu mipanov, they were left disconcerted before him, they were full of shame, they couldn't even open their mouths. And then Yosef says, Vayemer Yosef al Echav, Yosef tells his brother, Geshuna Elai, come close to me, if you please. Vayigoshu, they came close. Vayemer Ani Yosef, Achichem, I am your brother, Ashmachatem Oisi Mitzrayim. Now, Rashi says in the words, Geshuna Elai, come close to me. Ra'isam Nesegim La'oche, he saw them backing away, they were walking away, distancing themselves from him. Omar Achshav Achayin Lichlomim, he said, now that my brothers feel ashamed, he called out to them, B'loshen Rakav V'sachnunim, V'herelem Shehu Mol, and showed them that he was circumcised. So over here, we have a couple of klotz kashas that we have to understand. First of all, this is a famous question that all the commentaries speak about. What does it mean that Yosef says, Ani Yosef, I am Yosef, Ha'oid Choy? Is my father still alive? The Torah already mentioned before in last week's Parsha that Yosef asked his brothers whether their father is alive, and Yehuda answers, and he says to Yehuda answers clearly, and he says, Vayishalem l'sholem, this is in Parsha Miketz, Kapitel Mem Gimel Pasuk Chav Zayin, Vayemar Shalom Avichem Azokan Hashamatem Aydenu Choy. He asked them if the father is still alive. They said he's still alive. So why is Yosef saying over here, Ha'oid ovichoi? Why is our father still? Is your father? Is our father still alive? After he revealed himself to be Yosef, and why does it tell them punkt right now? It's already the shock when it says Hani Yosef, I am Yosef, your brother. Everything that's been happening to you, you've been worrying, mysterious. What's going on? And by him saying Ani Yosef, everything makes sense all of a sudden. And then he says, Ha'ida v'choy. Why is it punkt this second that he tells him these words? And also, why doesn't Rashi bavon? Why can Rashi make a statement about this? Pshuta Shemikri already said before. The pasuk said that they told him that Yaakov was alive. So why doesn't Rashi say anything about this question? Also, what is this story over here that he showed them that they're circumcised? What is that about? What does that mean? What is the significance? Now, first I'll tell you what the Rebbe says. There's a Sikha the Rebbe Chilek Tezvav, Vayigash Aleph. See there, page 389, 390. So first I'll repeat what the Rebbe says. The Rebbe doesn't speak about the whole question I'm going to bring out about circumcision, but it's going to be as we go further into it. But first, I'll repeat what the Rebbe says. So the Rebbe asked many questions. The ones that I mentioned are the main questions. And the Rebbe answers that it's not a question actually whether Yosef is not actually asking whether his father's alive. He knows that his father's alive. It's a question of bewilderment. And this is very important now for the narrative just in this spot. Why? Rashi already said before, the Ben Chomish Lemika knows that Rashi already said a long time ago that the pasuk says concerning Yaakov, when he found out about Yosef that he'd been disappeared, and it said, Vayakumu kol banav v'chol bnei Yosef lenachmoi, they came to comfort him, Vayimoim le'isnachem, he refused to be comforted. And Rashi explained that as long as a person's alive, he's not comforted. That means that Yaakov is in a perpetual state of pain. There's no closure. For 22 years, suffering and anguish about what's going on with his son. And he couldn't be consoled, so Yaakov, in a certain sense, felt that Yosef's alive, but he didn't know what's happening with him. Imagine a person has a deep, deep, deep wound, that there's a child somewhere, that's his own flesh and blood, essence to essence, and you have no idea what's going on with him. And you can't be consoled, and you know the reason you can't be consoled is because the person's still alive, but the pain, no sense of closure, is there every single second. You cannot imagine how painful that is. Yosef also knows about this, that Yaakov is not being consoled, and that he's in pain. And that's when he says, Ani Yosef, I am Taka Yosef, your brother, I am alive. And since I'm alive, our father has not been comforted, and therefore he's in pain every single second. And that's the question. After enduring 22 years of constant pain, unimaginable pain, a wound that's deep and profound that we cannot imagine, every single minute for 22 years, how's his health going through such an anxiety for 22 years, such a pain? And therefore, Rashi says, the Rebbe explains, the narrative right afterwards, where Yosef tells his brothers that you have to rush. And he says, you should rush and go get him. Why is the rush? Maru v'alu elovi. Because we're dealing with sakonas nefashis. Every single second that in this state, it's a mamish danger, a matter of life and death. You know, like we talk about Hatzolah. Why do we have to make Hatzalah? There's emergency services without Hatzalah. Because Hatzalah treats it completely differently. Every single second counts. Like you're dealing with your father or your brother. So that's why Yosef, after he says, Ani Yosef, he makes this question immediate. That means our father is still, because I'm the one, I'm still alive, here I am. He's right now still in that state where he's not comforted. And therefore, who knows how it's affected his health. And that's the wonder he's saying. After 22 years of such a tension, such a pressure, such a pain, such a deep ache, he's still totally at his full health. We have to take away, alleviate this problem immediately. So rush, go get him. It's an emergency. If so, why can't I go? And therefore he emphasizes right over here again a couple of times, I have a shlichus. I'm on duty over here. Hashem sent me on a mission. You didn't send me on a mission. Hashem wants me here to make sure and pave the way to be able to take care of Yaakov, etc. So this is all the Rebbe Sicha. See there. I want to add another point that the Rebbe doesn't emphasize. And this is that it's a statement, Ani Yosef. I am Yosef. It's a statement about who I am. And that this proves I'm Yosef. In other words, it's an immediate reaction, a knee-jerk reaction. Von a kind zu a tate, was says a starke mekusher, from a parent to a child, who's completely connected at the deepest level, that he tells his brothers, I wasn't Masiach Das for 1 second about our father. That's on my mind every single second, every single minute for the past 22 years. What's happening with my father? And that's a reflection that he's a brother. He's a Jew. The special connection and the respect of Kabed Seviche V'Simecha, that it's on the highest level, that we look at our parents like God, and that's why the Kabed Seviche V'Simecha from the Aseret Adibus is between the commandments that have been Adon L'Mokoim. Without going to all the explanations right now, that's what Yiddishkeit is about. And that's what it means to be truly attached. The Nafshi Kshur B'Nafshi, as the Pasuk says concerning Yaakov and Binyamin. And therefore he answers immediately. He proclaims immediately as who am I? What am I? What's my mahus? I'm that sort of a person that every single second, what's my life about? Hey, Dovichoy. How can I bring nachas to my father? How can I make life better for my father? Is my father alive? And we can connect this with a story, a famous story, which I'm going to connect to another story. The Rebbe explains in Kuntas Yonash Oteres Achsidis, a famous story that the Alter Rebbe wanted to bless a chassid, Rebbe Kisir Lepel, with Peirush. Sorry. He wanted to bless this chassid with life. Siyayim Yim Vav Cheshvan. So he wanted to bless this chassid with life, a blessing for long life. So the chassid said, "Aber nicht mit Peirush, not the lives of a peasant, which eyes that don't see and ears don't hear, spirituality." So the Rebbe asked a question: if someone's going to give you a blessing for long life, just say Amen Ken Yiratzen. Don't make conditions to the blessing. You say, you know what? I don't only want $100. I want $200. I don't only want a blessing of long life. I want a blessing with a certain type of long life. What do you mean? If this was the gift, take the gift. So the Rebbe answers a Moedik answer. The Rebbe answers that Rebbe Kisir Lepler was defining what is life to him. Life is spirituality, a life-connected spirituality. It's not that first you get one thing called long life, lebedekeit, being alive, and then in addition to being alive, you have a life connected to spirituality. No! He's telling the Alter Rebbe the definition of life is a life connected to spirituality. And the Rebbe gives an analogy over there. Imagine somebody getting a blessing for somebody. You should a son of a king, a prince, getting a blessing. You should live a long, long life in a cell, in a farm with a gorilla, in a cage with a gorilla. You'd say, Amen. You'd say, no way. That's not life. So the same thing over here. Kasil Lepler just told Alter Rebbe that it should be a life which is connected to spirituality, which is about spirituality, or else it's not life. Not it's a lesser life, not it's a lower life, or a diminished life. It's not life. So the question you could ask over here is, the Rebbe doesn't say this. Doesn't the Alter Rebbe know this? Didn't Rebbe Kasil Lepler understand that if the Alter Rebbe is giving him life, the Alter Rebbe is giving him true life, a real life, which is obviously connected to spirituality? But maybe he could say, and the Rebbe doesn't say this clearly, but I think it should be said, in my humble opinion, Rebbe Kasil Lepler had a knee-jerk reaction. And the Rebbe says it was coming from the highest level of his soul, his level of Yechidah. So when the Alter Rebbe gave him a blessing, and it was a blessing about long life, he immediately says, what's life? Like he wasn't even thinking so much, the Alter Rebbe is giving me a bracha. Immediately you react in such a way. Similar to another story that the Rebbe said about another chassid called Binyamin Kletzke, and that he was in his business and he was making all the reckonings of the mathematical, cheshbonis, sum total. And when he wrote with his pen, sum total, sachakel, and he wrote, Eineid milvadei, Eineid milvadei. There's nothing else but him. The sachakel, the sum total of reality, of existence, of everything in the business, is Eineid milvadei. There's nothing else but him. In other words, and the Rebbe always said this story, and he always emphasized the same point, that what's the chiddush of the Maisa? The chiddush of the Maisa is, of course, if you go over to a normal person and you ask him, what's reality? Hu levadi uvein zelosei. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. We believe, and anyone who studies Chassidus especially, that's been ingrained and drilled and etched in his mind again and again and again, that Hashem is the only reality. But that's if you sit down seriously and think. But the chiddush of this chassid was that he's in Wall Street, he's in Rodeo Drive, he's on Fifth Avenue, he's on the business district, he's in his business, and he's thinking all cheshbonis. He wrote down some numbers of business transactions. But when it came to that line, where it comes to the sum total, sachakel, he automatically wrote, Eineid milvadei. That's the chiddush. That it's so natural, Elokus b'pshitas, it's so natural in his mindset and his consciousness, that the Eibishter is the only reality, that he wrote that without even thinking. That's how much is part of him. It's his natural reaction. The same thing over here, Yesh Leimar. This is the story of Yosef. Ani Yosef. As soon as he tells his brothers, Ani Yosef, automatically, without even thinking as a technical question, of course he knows his father's life because he was told before, but it just comes out of him. Wie fühlt sich dem Taten? How is our father feeling? That's what I am. And that proves that I'm your brother. That's how important to me our father is. That's the definition in the Jewish world of family, of parent-child relationship, of child-parent relationship. Now, connected to this, just as a side point, it's interesting that over here, just as a side point, but I think it's a beautiful point, Rashi says, Geshuna, approach. That's what the pasuk says. And the beginning of the parsha is Vayigash. In the beginning of the parsha, there's a Vayigash, it's an encounter, and it's fraught with tension, and there's going to be possibly an eruption, a World War III, a clash between Yosef and his brothers right now. So it was very, very volatile situation. Then we come later and it says Shunai Lai, and it's a lashon which is used as closeness. So we have a very important lesson over here in life. Sometimes you have an encounter, the same word, connected to an encounter, and it could be a very volatile encounter, full of tension, animosity, and divisiveness, and worry, etc. And then there could be another sort of encounter, which is closeness. You give a hug to each other when we're dealing with brothers. In any case, what does he do? He shows him his circumcision. Now over here, you could say, This is the connection to Chanukah. What's the story of Chanukah? Let's take a pause. The story of Chanukah was that the Yevonim, the Hellenists, and the Greeks wanted to defile anything which is sacred, anything which is not logical. What's marriage? Marriage, there's no sanctity. There's nothing holy about it. There's nothing, that's just two people, whatever, joining to make a family, or I don't know exactly what's going on in their mind. But as we know, the famous story of Chanukah with Yehudis, that she chopped off that governor or general's head, because they made a decree that every bride had to sleep, to lay with the general before the night of the marriage to their husband. The Rambam also says, Poshtu Yedayim B'vnei Seyem. They violated Jewish girls. So the whole idea of marriage meant nothing to them. Timu kol hashmanim shebehechel. The whole idea of Tumen Tara, what's holy, what's purity, and what's not, made no difference to them. Because logically speaking, if we take a flask of oil, which is pure, tohir, and take another flask, which is tummy, there's no laboratory in the world, no MRI test, no scientific test that can show the difference in one or the other. So therefore it means nothing to them. Also, what were they against? They were against Milah. What means they were against Milah? That means the physical is the physical. Don't try to take the physical and what represents in a certain sense the ultimate of physical pleasure and try to make it holy. There's no connection to holiness. What's Yiddishkeit? The total opposite. Taking the Ois Bris Kodesh and sanctifying it and saying that could be the holiest of holies. And now we understand Yosef saying, first of all, Ha'ed Avichoi, because that's a reflection of who he is, and the sanctity of the family unit, and the depth, the immeasurable depth of the connection between a parent and a child to a parent, which is in Yiddishkeit. Kabri desavicha vesemecha is from the mitzvahs ben adam lemokoim. There are no words to describe it and to have limits to it, etc. Right after that, when he wants to also identify himself, what does he do? He shows them his Ois Bris Kodesh. As we know, according to Kabbalah, that the male organ is called Yesoid. Yosef was showing his brothers that therein lies the secret of my survival in Mitzrayim. Everyone knows that Yosef is called Tzaddik Elyon. Yosef, according to Kabbalah, is the level of Yesoid. And what does it say about Tzaddikim? Tzaddik Yesoid Oilam. So first in the words of Pasuk Eliyahu, it says, Yesoid is Siyum de Gufa, is the end of the body. It's also Labar Gufa. Ois Bris Kodesh, the symbol of the sacred covenant. What's the symbol of the sacred covenant? What's the symbol of the essential bond between Hashem and Yidden? Ois Bris Kodesh is the Yesoid of the person's body, because that represents the ultimate of how a Jew is connected to Hashem in this physical world. That we take Gashmis, Tachtoinim, and we make it a Dira Loyes Baruch, and we dedicate it towards Hashem. And Yosef, who represents the ultimate of that level, Ois Bris Kodesh, shows his brothers, this is who I am, because I was pure and innocent in this area, and this is how Jews are different. That we retain our innocence and our purity, even in an environment which may be hostile. And also connected to the idea of Tzaddik Yisoid Olam, the power of procreation and influence comes from that Yisoid, because it's Mashpia, and it shows an Iskashos connection. And that's why we say Tzaddik, the Tzaddikim are Yisoid Olam, the foundation of the world. That's what it means, the foundation of the world. The Eibusha chooses Tzaddikim as an instrument through which he influences the world, but it also means Tzaddik Yisoid Olam, they are influencing the world. Hashem, through the Tzaddikim, are influencing the whole world. Therefore, they're called Yesoid. They're the foundation, like the Yesoid in a person, which contains all the ingredients of everything that came before. The power to influence, the power to procreate, the power to give life. And that's the power of every Yid, that can be an influencer to the world in a positive way, while retaining its special connection to Hashem. So now we understand the connection between Vayigash and Chanukah, that Chanukah was a story of where they wanted to desecrate holiness, in particular the sanctity of the family unit. Marriage means nothing, purity means nothing, circumcision means nothing. All these areas that are connected to the family unit and procreation. We see clearly that the Yevonim were the Greeks, the Assyrians, were targeted, focused, particularly in that area. And now we come to the Dan Notzach, similar. I don't want to elaborate now; it's too late. That you could look at the whole story, that this was a court case about an inheritance issue, a family quarrel about an inheritance. And then you could say that, there's certain laws when it comes to family inheritance. But that's if you're looking at it secularly. But if you're looking at it in the sense of holiness, there's a concept of a Rebbe. And there's a Rebbe-Chassid relationship. And it doesn't fit into the dictionary of other relationships. And this is the Chiddush, that the judge understood that. And therefore he came to the conclusion that the Rebbe's entire life and everything about the Rebbe, even his possessions are not really his personal possessions. They entirely belong to the Chassidim. And this is the connection between Vayigash, a family unit is sacred, Chanukah, and Hey Tevis, the connection to Avinu, we could say, is our Rebbe. And there's something which words cannot explain in a secular sense. There's something deeper than that. And I think the lesson for us all is that as Chassidim, the question we have to ask ourselves every single day, just like Yosef, who cries out, Ha'ei Davichoi, I'm not being Masir Das. I wasn't Masir Das. I didn't forget about Yaakov, our father, for 1 second of one day. The same thing is true of every single Chassid. Ha'oid Avichoi, is the Rebbe alive in me? Am I Masir Das? Do I forget about the Rebbe? Or this is what I'm crying out at all times. Ha'oid Rebbe Chai. Ha'oid Rebbe Avi Chai in me. And K'mayim upon him. And this is what we have to take for Hey Tevis. The more we live with the Rebbe, the more we live with the Tzaddik, the more the Tzaddik is alive in us and guides us and gives us inspiration and helps us. And so too, concerning Avinu Shebeshamayim, that we live with Ha'oid Avichoi, even though I can't see my Father, but I know and I believe that He's with us, and that the more I'm attached to Him, then the more He's attached to me. As the saying goes, the Eibishter definitely loves you. The Eibishter is definitely with you. The question is if you're with the Eibishter. The Eibishter should help, that we should go. We're going from Chanukah, the amazing days. We went from Zeis Chanukah to Isra Chag Chanukah, into Shabbos, straight into Hey Tevis. Amazing days, one after the other. So the Eibishter should help. It should be the Dan Notzach. We should win in every single area, over all challenges, over all adversity, over all battles, over all struggles. We should come out the winners, and we should come to the ultimate Dan Notzach, Begula, Mitzvah Shleima, take it from Yad, Mamish. Posting from my home, Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach, your man in Melbourne.